Is crisis enough? Is all that we're waiting for because, in spite of the fact that we give lip service to the idea of crisis, when was the last time any one of you murdered a rat in an alley in order to get dinner? Well, people did that all over Europe in the 40s after the collapse of Nazi Germany, and that wasn't the end of the world. That was just a little European political contretemps. So we're extremely spoiled. I really think what we need is for the screws to be tightened a little bit. And then, people, I think it is coming. I just hope it's coming fast enough. The trick, you see, is to make the omelet without breaking the egg. And the longer we hesitate, the more difficult it's going to be. Somehow, we have to undergo a total transformation at every level. And I don't mean the patrons of Esalen Institute. I mean the patrons of Ma's Hash House in Cleveland. They have to undergo this total. You forgot about them?
I asked about this, and those people, sitting there watching TV, drinking beer, are we talking about those people too?
Well, a Buddhist would say yes, we cannot enter into enlightenment until we carry the last sentient being with us. But my God, what a tall order.
Right. So that's my point. That's why I was getting at is that how is this going to be handled? Just what we're talking about right now. We're trying to discuss the plan for handling.
You mean what comes at the end?
No, with the other audience besides the Esalen patrons. What other audience,
Well, I think, we have that a culture can evolve no faster than it can evolve its language. Because if you don't have words to talk about what you're pointing at, then it's a private experience. So what the forced evolution of language, not the force, that sounds a little heavy-handed, the planned transformation of language is what is necessary. Yes, repairing syntax. We have, to the present time, been willing to allow language to just evolve willy-nilly. And an example of the opposite case, for instance, is the attempt to eliminate sexism from our language and the humor that it provokes. The idea that someone would use a tremendously ungainly word like chairperson, or a silly notion like herstory. His story, her story, this kind of thing. And yet the motivation, I think, is very good. People are saying you cannot change your political understanding until you consciously do something about your language. The Germans could not have gassed the Jews if they had not had a vocabulary which allowed them to see Jews as subhuman. And that was the phrase, subhuman. What's the word, Peter? Subhuman in German. Untermensch, the under people. And they, the subman. Well, my God, once you have government newspapers with this kind of thing being bandied about, well, then you just say, they're not people, they're the under people. Language gives permission for all kinds of atrocities and the potential for transformation. Now, as always in the political game, our side gets there second. We march up to take control of the machinery of language creation, and we discover that Joseph Goebbels got there first, and Madison Avenue, and so forth and so on. We are children in the arts of propaganda. They are extremely expert. Nevertheless, it's transformation of language that we have to do. One of the things I've suggested and met with great puzzlement, even by the inner faithful, is this thing where I try to promote the idea that we could change our view of the world into a more humane direction if we would reform our calendar, if we would abandon the solar calendar, and that we're not playing on a level field when we use the calendar and the time point of view of the dominator culture. We need a lunar calendar that has a precession against the solar year so that the holidays slip and move, so that the notion of flow and flux is primary rather than the notion of static, eternal forms. Our metaphors, in the broadest sense, meaning everybody from me to radix and through the new, our metaphors will never get a fully reasonable hearing within a context of solar paternal language. The deck is stacked. Yeah.
Before we took our break, you started to talk about why you thought we will end up with artificial language. And could you maybe comment on how you think this might enter into what you've been...
Well, not exactly so much artificial language. Somebody asked about cetacean intelligence and life in the seas. And this also goes to Kathleen's work. I've tried to imagine an ontological transformation of the human form rather than a technological breakthrough of the more ordinary sort. And I tried to do that because it seems to me, when you start thinking about it, that obviously the first tool, or one of the first tools, was language. Language is a way of organizing acoustical signals, which are things in the three-dimensional world. They move through air. Language is a way of organizing acoustical signals so that they convey intentionality. Intentionality is an interior condition of the mind. And language is this bizarre ability which must have burst rather spontaneously on the scene, where suddenly we discovered that by modulating acoustical signals we could create models in the minds of nearby fellow species members of our intentions. Well, the problem, and this set us on the long road to this evening, but the problem is that every language is ultimately limited at its upper level by the depth of the coding medium. And a good example of this is smoke signals. This would be a terrible way to transmit Paradise Lost to someone. You see, the depth of the coding medium is rather shallow. It can say, "We're here," or "We'll be there in 3 days." But it can hardly say, south and south and southward we fled till it grew wondrous cold, and ice mast high went floating by as green as emerald. Smoke signals can't do that. Acoustical language also has severe depth of code constraints on it. But it's possible to imagine ontological transformations of language which would be very different. South and south and southward we fled till it grew wondrous cold, and ice mast high went floating by as green as emerald.